In today's tutorial, we're going to be making a snowy mountain landscape using just 3 colours. Welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Michelle, and on this channel we do all things watercolour, as well as watercolour pencils, drawing tutorials and more. If that's something that interests you, please do consider subscribing. It's completely free. Now, this tutorial is day 2 of my winter landscape challenge. If you haven't heard about that, don't worry, you can treat this video just as an ordinary tutorial. But if you would like to take part in the challenge, it's super relaxed. You can do it at any time. You can do it in any order you like. Just pop into the video description. You can download a free PDF that goes with each of the 5 videos. It'll give you the photograph to work from, a copy of my painting, and also a full materials list. It'll tell you everything I'm using and also give you some swaps in case you don't have the same materials. These tutorials are simple enough for beginners, but they're also fun for more experienced artists. They make great Christmas card projects too. Today we're only going to be using 3 primary colours, but I'm also going to be using some oil pastel. Don't panic if you haven't got oil pastels. I'll give you some alternatives, and there'll be alternatives for you as well in the downloadable PDF. If you want to watch the full video about the challenge, that's in the description as well, along with lots of other helpful information. I'll also put all of the challenge videos into each video description so that you can catch up. And let's point the camera downwards and get started on today's snowy mountain landscape. Should be quite appropriate because in my car just now, on the news, they said it's going to snow here in the UK very soon. So let's look at today's picture. Now, because this is a portrait shaped painting, you will find that you may not always see all of it on screen at the same time, but if I put the camera higher up, then you wouldn't be able to see detail. So I will move it around. I'll also try and take some photographs at stages and drop them in so you can get a look at the overall shape of it. So here is today's photograph. So we've got this sky and this snowy mountain here. And then we've got these sort of slopes, and you see we've got these textured areas. I'm going to put those in oil pastel. When I come to that part, I'll give you some alternatives. If you don't own any oil pastels, you can use different types of pastels, but you'll just have to go about it a different way. You can also just use paint for this tutorial. I'm going to stick to 3 primary colours. I'll show you what those are in a moment after we've done the drawing. But if you're painting the textured areas, you might need 1 or 2 earth colours as well. So when you're looking at how to draw something like this, you want to sort of think of it in terms of the amount of space that it takes up on the side. For example, here is the top, and I can measure this area here, and I can see it's roughly probably about 1/4 of the height of my paper, and that will enable me just to place a little mark at the top of my paper. So let's do that now. I want to have room for my sky. I'm also thinking about sloping the top of this mountain down. I can look now and see how much room it takes up from here to here. So it comes down quite a lot. I could also, if I wanted to, sort of take a right angle across and see where it lined up with the other side. All of that's going to enable me to get those rough proportions correct. I can also, if I want to, use my pencil to measure. I can take this measurement here and then just place it on the bottom part and see which is biggest. Having just done that, I can tell you it's almost exactly halfway down. So I'll find about halfway down the right-hand side of my paper. I'll pop that mark in now. I'll do the same with 1 or 2 other marks. I might find an area here, for example, or this slope here at the bottom, and that's just going to allow me to get some gentle slopes in. Once I've placed that slopes in, that's all the drawing I'm going to need. Now, I don't know how well you can see the lines that I've drawn on camera, but I'm just starting to get these sloping areas in really quite simply. Don't obsess about getting it to look exactly the same. Just make sure that you've got something that you're happy with that looks quite natural without putting in too many lines. Let's look now at some colours. I'm going to be mostly using this cerulean blue. The only reason it's in this little pot is because the tube split ages ago and I poured it out to save wasting it. So cerulean is a weak, granular, very delicate blue. And don't forget to download the free PDF because you can get some colour swaps in there if you don't have these colours. I've also put out the other 2 primaries, so I've got a little bit of pink, That's going to enable us just to warm this colour up when we need to. If I add yellow, the third primary, we'll start to mix towards neutral tones. And with the addition of some oil pastels, we're going to do the whole project with these three colours. We're going to start by painting our sky. Now I've pre-mixed some colours. I mixed here some blue with a tiny bit of the other colours to make a grey. Now you notice it doesn't look like grey at all. You can see all this pink. That's because the cerulean is heavily granulating. It's sunk to the bottom. So as we work with granulating colours, we need to stir to apply them. The same has happened with the blue here. This is mostly blue with the tiniest touch of pink just to take that iciness off of it. But you can see that it's separated here. I'll just stir it before I apply. But we're going to start by wetting the sky. I have clean water here. I'm going to take it down only as far as the top of the mountain. In fact, I'm stopping just about 1 millimetre short of that. You can't always see where you're painting with water, so it'll be better to go closer to it when I've got paint on my brush. This area needs to be saturated, but we don't want puddles. I'm going to be particularly careful to wipe around the edges of the tape so there are no puddles sitting on the edge that could cause me trouble later on. And now very quickly, I'm going to stir this paint. It's not too watery, you see, it needs to be strong because it's going onto a pre-wet area. I already see I haven't mixed up nearly enough. And that's the thing with cerulean, it's a very weak colour. I'm going to add some more in from here. I can always put the pink straight on the paper if I need to. Now with all skies, you want to consider that they are darker towards the top. There's too much water here on my paper. So I'm drying my brush so that I can sweep that out. And I want to get a nice loose effect here. Don't be frightened of your paint. Now we're going to go in just down here. There's a little bit of almost like, I don't know if it's distant clouds or mountains, but there's something going on down here. I'm going to pop that in. Now I'm going to change to a round brush. 1 or 2 splatters of paint have landed upon my mountains, but we're not going to stress about that. Getting the sky right is more important. There's a ton of texture on the mountains. That stuff won't even show later on. I'm going to leave that alone now. I suspect it may not be dark enough in places. I can adjust it later on. The most important thing with skies is to work quickly and leave them alone. If I need another layer later on, that's absolutely fine. There are also 1 or 2 specks here that could be paper or fluff or something else. I'm not going to touch them because that way disaster lies. I have here some oil pastels. Let me show you what they can do. We're going to rub them on the paper. Now they are permanent, so just as if you were trying out any other technique, you're going to try them out on a scrap of paper first, because you always do that, right? You never ever chuck something on your painting and just hope for the best. I'm quite convinced that you always try things out first. So let me show you what they do. We're going to rub them on the textured watercolor paper. You can see that they hit the bumps, but they don't go in the dips. Let's try a different color. So, do these textured marks remind you of anything? Look how perfect it's going to be to make these dark textured areas on our mountains. We can just paint on top. Now this brush here, it's in decent condition, but it's very old. The point has gone. I'm not going to use one of my best brushes to paint on top of oil pastels because some of it often comes up onto the bristles and you can ruin a good brush. So I want you to do this part with an old brush. Let's go a little darker. So oil pastels can be used dark on light, light on dark. You can also put them on top of dry paint. They do look better if you put them on first though, and the paint sort of molds around them. What about if you don't have any oil pastels? You could use soft pastels. You'd have to apply them at the end though. The chalky ones are not waterproof. They'll be water soluble, so you need to put them on right at the end. You could also use something called a dry brush technique where you get a really old, probably a stiff acrylic bristly brush. The scruffier the better, and you take very dry paint across the top of your paper. That will also catch on the bumps. And of course, as we discussed, you're going to try that out on a scrap of paper before placing it on your painting just to see how it looks. Now, usually with a landscape, we have to make sure the sky looks exactly as we want it before we do the rest. But we've got extreme luxury with this particular subject because there's nothing in front of the sky. There's not a fence post, there's not a tree, there's nothing. So we can keep adjusting the sky if we want to as we go through the painting. So I'm not going to touch this area because it's still damp. I'm going to start applying my oil pastel. Now, it's important not just to scribble roughly because you can see it doesn't make the most natural shapes if you do that. I want to make sure I've got lighter, cooler colours in the background. I would prefer to have a very pale grey, but I don't seem to own one. So I can use this one and just press quite lightly. As I come forward, I'll get more darks. We've got these strong darks in the middle, and then we've got warmer colours towards the front of the painting. And that will help to make the areas in the back recede because warmer, brighter colours come forward, softer, cooler colours go back. So I'm going to start with this lightest colour and just start applying some, looking back all the time at my photograph to tell me where to put things. Now, there are areas where it ends in quite a hard edge. In other words, we've got a sharpness to the edge. I've got a special trick for achieving this. That's what we'll do next. I've got some masking tape here. Luckily, I'm wearing quite a thick, fluffy sweatshirt today. What I'm doing is I'm going to press, and I have pressed this on my sweatshirt quite a few times in order to pick up some lint. It'll be too sticky alone and could tear my paper, so I want to take off an awful lot of the sticky before I use it. It's also quite malleable, so you can sort of mold it around edges by almost pleating it. So you sort of take it up like this, and we can mold it around any edges like so. What it's done now is it's given me a kind of edge here so that I can work up to the edge and end up, rather than quite a ragged line, end up with quite a straight line. Whenever you pull tape or anything off of your paper, keep it at a low angle and pull it slowly. In this way, you should avoid tearing your paper. And you see how I've got a nice smooth edge here. I'm going to spend quite a bit of time now going on and placing these areas of oil pastel in, always looking back to see what's going on. Don't put too much on. Remember, you can't get this stuff off, so it's important to apply it carefully. Spend some time so that you get a nice natural effect. At this point in the tutorial, can I just stop for a second and ask you just to click that like button, that thumbs up. It really helps me with the YouTube algorithm. What I really want is for lots of people to do this challenge. I really enjoy seeing all your different versions. So don't forget to share with the hashtag. I would also love you to share the videos that I put up. It takes many hours, days, in fact, possibly even weeks to make a challenge such as this. And you can say thank you to me by sharing this video and the other videos in the series. Now let's get back to today's tutorial. Now, one thing that's super important is that you actually get the shape of the mountain, because these areas coming down the mountain, they are curved and they are following the shapes of the mountain. And if we get that right, it's really going to be helpful. But before I carry on with that, I'm actually going to put some more colour in the sky. So let's do that. Now, I'm fairly happy with it, but I'd like a stronger contrast because we're going to use the white of the paper for snow. So I need a stronger contrast here. And this is quite a pale granular colour. If you don't like this granulation, other options are available. I quite like the way it granulates. I also feel like we need a tiny touch of pink over here and some more of this grey colour down the bottom. All we need to do is repeat the process. I'm going to wet the sky up again, but this time, instead of starting up here where I could spread this pigment across, I'm going to start in the lighter area down the bottom here and work up like so. For some reason, this brush has started, after me owning it for about 20 years, it started molting, which is quite shocking. Re-wetting the whole area. And this is so much more effective than working on your sky too long in one go. Let's go in with more paint, and I want to get that edge along there this time. So we can go a little bit stronger. This flat brush enables me to go around the edge quite nicely. Spread this colour across. I don't want to lose all the lightness over this side. I'm going to change brushes now. Flat brushes are great for large areas, but they can leave somewhat uncomfortable marks. I want to get a bit of pink in the sky now. It's got a bit of blue in here, that's fine. I'm just going to add the tiniest touch in. Most pinks are staining colours, so they're quite strong and bright, so you want to be careful with those. I also need to avoid any water build up here, so I can dry my brush and lift out. Let's go in with this colour I've mixed here again. Get a bit of drama down here. Do remember that watercolours dry lighter than when you apply them. I'm going to add a bit of pink to that because that's gone a little bit cold for my liking. I'm also just going to take a little bit of colour down here so that we can see that mountain edge. Blend across with a damp brush. It's starting to dry now, so I'm going to leave that alone. I'm going to finish applying all of the oil pastel and then we'll put the next layer of paint on. I'm fairly happy with my sky now it's dried. The thing with watercolour skies is don't ever expect to get an exact replica because you simply don't have the luxury of working on them for as long as you would do with something like an oil painting. Now I've put all the oil pastel in the foreground. I spent a long time. You can see that the masking tape, it got torn into pieces. I was, layering it and lapping it so that I could get some of these nice straight edges. What we're going to do now is mix a shadow colour and we're going to define some of these areas by putting shadow across them. Now, there are two types of shadow. You get shadow that's got a hard edge and shadow that's got a soft edge. And of course, I'm going to have to use quite a scruffy brush because I don't want to mess up my best brush. So let's have a look. Let's turn that over. Now, if I've got shadow going onto an area and it's hard edge shadow, obviously this isn't the right color, and we can just place it on like that. But if I want a soft edge, I have options. I can either use a damp brush, so I rinse and dry my brush and blend out the edge with clean water, or sometimes it's easier to start with a little bit of clean water on the paper on the side where you know you want softness, and then you start on the dry paper and you bring the paint down to that area of softness. In this way, we're going to get soft shadows and hard shadows. It's very sunny here, so there's a lot of hard edge shadows, but there are some softer ones too. I'm going to mix up a nice puddle of a blue that's just slightly tinted with the yellow and pink to make it more of a lilac-y grey, and then we'll get started. I've actually found another old brush too. This one's so old that the paint is falling off, but it's a bit smaller, so I'll be able to wield it a little bit better. There are also some sort of large areas of shadow, particularly across this mountain part here. So what I'm going to do here is to get a soft edge, I'm going to take some clean water up here and then go straight into the colour I mixed. You see that pink separating there. There's only the tiniest amount of yellow in this, just to knock the brightness off it a little. And I'm just going to come down like so and get some shadow across all of this area. And bring down with a little bit more water. It's a little bit dark there. But do remember, as I said, it does dry lighter, so hold your nerve with it. You can always sweep on a bit more water as you're painting and dry your brush so that you can just make it a little lighter. I'm also going to put some dark paint on one or two of these other areas before we go into smaller parts of the painting. I'll put some darker paint on this area here next. So I did exactly the same with this area here, wet the top part and then put some paint on. I'm going to put a bit more water in this to make it a little lighter, and then I'm going to go in and start painting these smaller areas of shadow. Now, it's really, really important with a snow scene that you don't cover up all of the white. There's a lot of shadow on here, but there's also a lot of white. We need to leave that white, otherwise it's not going to look like a snow scene by the time we've finished. It's one of the easiest mistakes to make. So working down from the top and just always looking back at my photograph, placing in hard-edged shadows where I see them, blending out with clean water where I want softness. There are lots of small areas of shadow as well. You want to try and get a little bit of shadow wherever there is oil pastel because it looks much better with paint behind it than it does alone. Remembering to keep referring back to your picture and seeing where there is a lot of shadow and where there's only a little bit so that we don't cover up all of the white. So as I come forward, breaking up these areas a little more, you'll find you need quite a lot of paint on the brush, otherwise it doesn't sort of go onto the oil pastel areas. It needs to be able to sink in between those areas. Remember that as you come forwards, marks should be a little darker, a little stronger, a little hard-edged. It's going to help with that idea of distance. And there are a lot of marks here, kind of almost triangular shaped. Always remember to look back at what's going on in your photograph. And as we come into the foreground, we've got a huge amount of tiny marks here. We're contrasting areas like this with smoother areas you can see above. Once I've done this bit, the last thing I'll do is just have a look and see if there are any areas like this one here that aren't really being very well defined. I may just drop a little bit of shadow behind one or two areas. As I said, really important not to overdo it. I also have quite a lot of pencil marks on my painting, mostly because I have to go a little darker when I'm filming so that you can all see what's going on. Once I've put these final shadows in, the painting is finished. I'll put a picture up so you can see how it looks. So before you leave this video, don't forget to have a look in the video description and get all that free information down there. And I'll see you in the next Winter Landscape Challenge video. We're going to be doing something really exciting.